The research vessel Quiet Seeker drifted through the darkness of Sector 77 Null, a region of space that had been forbidden for 3,000 years. And Chief Scientist Thrin pressed her four-fingered hands against the cold metal wall as another explosion rocked the ship from deep within its failing core. She had never felt fear like this before, not in all her 40 years of exploring the unknown corners of the galaxy. And now she watched her crew stumble through smoke-filled corridors while alarms screamed warnings that nobody needed to hear because they could all feel the ship dying around them. "How long do we have?" she asked her second officer, a young male named Korath, whose scales had turned pale gray with terror. "The reactor will go critical in 6 hours, he said, his voice breaking as he spoke, and our communication array was destroyed in the initial blast. So we cannot call for help from the Concord or anyone else." Thrin closed her large dark eyes and tried to think clearly despite the chaos surrounding her, because she was the captain and these 12 souls depended on her to find a way out of this disaster that should never have happened. They had come to Sector 77 Null to study ancient asteroid formations, ignoring the warnings that had been passed down through generations. And now the universe was punishing them for their arrogance in ways she could never have imagined. "There must be something," she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else, "some way to send a signal. Some backup system we have not tried." Korath shook his head slowly, but then his eyes went wide as he remembered something he had seen in the ship's oldest files during his training years ago. "Captain," he said carefully, "there is one system we have not activated, but I do not think we should use it because it connects to a frequency that has been forbidden since before our grandparents were born." Thrin turned to face him fully, her curiosity overcoming her fear for just a moment. "What frequency?" she demanded. "It is called the Human Emergency Network," Korath answered, and the words hung in the air like poison. "And it was installed on all Velkari ships 3,000 years ago, as part of some agreement that nobody talks about anymore." The name sent a chill through Thrin's body that had nothing to do with the failing life support systems, because every child in the galaxy grew up hearing stories about the humans, and none of those stories ended well for anyone who encountered them. Humans were the monsters that parents warned their children about when they misbehaved, the ancient terror that had once made the entire galaxy tremble, and the reason why so many species had learned to fear the dark spaces between the stars. They had been warriors without equal, scientists without limits, and conquerors without mercy. And the legend said they could adapt to any environment and overcome any enemy through sheer determination and terrifying creativity. But the humans had vanished 2,000 years ago, leaving behind only ruins and warnings, and a silence that most species considered a blessing from whatever gods they believed in. "The humans are gone," Thrin said firmly, trying to convince herself as much as Korath. "They left or died or ascended or whatever the stories claim. And activating that beacon will do nothing but waste our remaining power." "You are probably right," Korath agreed. But his eyes kept drifting to the console where the ancient system waited in darkness. Another explosion shook the ship, and this time the lights flickered and died for several terrible seconds before emergency power brought them back at half strength. "Aha!" Young engineer named Vess came running toward them, her blue fur matted with coolant fluid and her breathing rapid with exhaustion. "Captain, we have lost Deck 7 entirely," she reported, "and the fire suppression systems are failing throughout the ship. So we maybe have 4 hours now instead of 6. Thrin looked at her crew, these brave scientists who had followed her into forbidden space because they trusted her judgment. And she felt the weight of their lives pressing down on her shoulders like a mountain. She thought about her daughter back home, who was only 15 years old. And she thought about Korath's bonded partner, who was expecting their first child. And she thought about all the families who would never know what happened to their loved ones if the Quiet Seeker simply vanished into the "Void, show me the beacon," she said quietly to Korathi. Led her through damaged corridors to a section of the ship that looked older than everything around it, with controls that seemed primitive compared to their modern systems and warning labels written in languages that had been dead for centuries. The central console bore a symbol that Thrin recognized from her history studies. A blue circle containing shapes that the humans had called continents, representing their lost homeworld that they had named Earth below. The symbol were words in the human language that she could not read. But Korath activated a translation program, and the meaning appeared on screen. "Last resort," the translation said. "Activate only in desperate need. Help will come." "It could be a trap," Vess said from behind them. "Something the humans left to lure victims to them, so they could harvest resources or take slaves or whatever horrors they practiced before they disappeared. Or it could be exactly what it claims to be," Thrin responded. "A promise of help from a species that valued their word above all else, according to some of the older histories." She stood before the console for a long moment, listening to her ship groan and shudder as it slowly tore itself apart. And she made the only decision that a captain in her position could make. "Forgive me," she said to no one in particular. And she pressed the activation button. The console hummed to life with a sound like distant thunder, and a beam of energy shot upward through the hull and into the endless darkness of space, carrying a message that had not been sent in 2,000 years. Thrin watched the beacon pulse with ancient light, and she wondered if she had just saved her crew or doomed them to something far worse than a quick death in the cold vacuum of space across the galaxy. In places that had been forgotten by every living species, machines that had waited patiently for millennia began to wake from their long sleep, and lights flickered on in stations hidden in the hearts of dying stars. Something old and powerful had heard the call, and it was already beginning to answer. In the frozen darkness between galaxies, where no living thing had traveled in thousands of years, a station the size of a small moon began to wake from its ancient slumber. The station had no name that any current species would recognize, but the humans who built it had called it Sentinel Prime, and it had been waiting for exactly this moment since the day humanity chose to leave the galaxy behind. Lights flickered on in corridors that stretched for hundreds of kilometers, and machines began running diagnostic programs that had not been activated since before the Volcari had discovered. Fire deep in the heart of the station, a computer system older than most civilizations processed the incoming signal and began to analyze its contents with careful precision. "Emergency beacon activated," the computer announced to empty halls. "Source identified as Volcari research vessel in Sector 77 null. Threat assessment required. Initiating wake protocol for 7th Reclamation Fleet in chambers filled with blue light." Thousands of pods began their warming cycles, and inside each pod, a human soldier dreamed of wars that had ended before their great-grandchildren were born. Meanwhile, far across the galaxy, in the gleaming towers of the Galactic Concord headquarters, Ambassador Keth Vorn of the Dominion was enjoying his evening meal when his communication device began screaming with urgent alerts. He was a tall creature with skin like polished obsidian and eyes that burned with orange fire, and he had spent 200 years climbing the ranks of Dominion politics to reach his current position of power. Nothing frightened him anymore. Or so he believed until he read the message that had just arrived from the Deep Space Monitoring Network. "No," he whispered, his food forgotten as his hands began to tremble. "This cannot be happening. This must be some kind of mistake or false alarm or ancient malfunction." But the data was clear and undeniable. Someone had activated a human emergency beacon, and the signal was spreading across the galaxy like a disease, touching systems and frequencies that had been silent for 2 millennia. Kethaveran rushed from his quarters and ran through the halls of the Concord building, ignoring the confused looks of other diplomats as he burst into the emergency council chamber and activated every alarm he could reach within an hour. Representatives from 30 species had gathered in the chamber, their faces displaying every possible form of confusion and fear as they waited to learn why they had been summoned. "Someone explain what is happening," demanded High Counselor Mrenthi of the Yith Collective, her tentacles writhing with irritation at being disturbed during her rest. Cyclocitharon stood before them all and tried to find words that would not cause immediate panic, but he could not think of any gentle way to deliver this news. "The humans are coming back," he said simply. The chamber erupted in chaos as species that had been enemies for centuries suddenly found common ground in their shared terror. And it took several minutes before order could be restored. "The humans are extinct," argued Senator Vrex of the Korthan Empire. "They destroyed themselves in civil war or left this dimension entirely. And either way, they are no longer our concern." "That is what we told ourselves," Kethvor responded. "That is what we wanted to believe, but I have spent my career studying the classified archives, and I know the truth that our ancestors tried to bury." He activated the central display and showed them records that had been sealed for 2,000 years. Documents and images and recordings that painted a picture far different from the comfortable lies they had all been taught. "The humans did not lose their war against the Concord," he explained, as the evidence flickered across the screen. "They were winning, completely and absolutely winning. And that is why our ancestors begged them to leave." The records showed battle after battle, where human forces had crushed Concord fleets with impossible efficiency, where human soldiers had conquered planets in days that should have held for years, where human scientists had created weapons that made the most advanced Concord technology look like children's toys. "They agreed to leave because we offered them everything we had," Kethvarn continued. "Territory and resources and promises of eternal peace. And they accepted because their leaders said the war was changing them into something they did not want to become. But they made us promise something in return," he said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "They made us install emergency beacons on every ship in the galaxy. And they said that if anyone ever needed help badly enough to use one, they would return." High Counselor Mrenthi's tentacles had gone completely still, which was a sign of extreme fear in her species. "You are telling us," she said slowly, "that the most dangerous species in the history of the galaxy has been sleeping somewhere this whole time, waiting for a reason to come back, and now someone has given them that reason." "Yes," Kethvoran confirmed. "And worse than that, the signal came from Sector 77 Null, which is the region we quarantined specifically to prevent anyone from finding the human staging grounds." "What do we do?" asked Senator Vrex. His usual arrogance completely vanished. Kithavoran had been thinking about this question since the moment he received the alert, and he had come to a conclusion that he knew was dangerous, but believed was necessary. "We destroy the ship that sent the signal," he announced. "We eliminate everyone aboard before the humans can respond. And then we claim it was a malfunction or an accident or anything else that might convince them to go back to sleep." Several council members nodded in agreement, their fear overriding any moral objections they might have had under normal circumstances. "Send the Dominion battle fleet immediately," Kethvoran ordered. 200 ships should be enough to vaporize one small research vessel. And speed is essential because we do not know how long we have before the humans arrive. The order was sent, and across Dominion space, warships began powering their engines and setting course for Sector 77. None of them knew that they were already too late, that human ships had begun moving the moment the beacon was activated, and that the Dominion fleet was about to become the first lesson in why the galaxy had learned to fear humanity in the first place. In her chamber on Sentinel Prime, Fleet Admiral Mira Okonko opened her eyes for the first time in nearly 2,000 years and smiled as she read the reports flooding across her screens. "Someone needs help," she said to herself. And we made a promise. She began giving orders. And an armada that had been sleeping since before the current Concord was formed started preparing for war. 3 hours had passed as Thrin activated the beacon, and the Quiet Seeker was dying faster than anyone had predicted. The main reactor had been shut down to prevent explosion, which meant they were running on emergency batteries that would last maybe another 2 hours. And the temperature inside the ship was dropping rapidly as life support systems began to fail. Thrin sat on the bridge with her remaining crew, 11 frightened scientists who had huddled together for warmth and comfort. And she could not stop thinking about the decision she had made. "Do you think anything heard the signal?" Young Vess asked, her voice weak from cold and exhaustion. "I do not know," Thrin admitted. "But at this point, I am not sure it matters. Because we will freeze to death long before any rescue ship could reach us from Concord space." Korath was watching the sensors with the desperate hope of someone looking for a miracle. And suddenly, his entire body went rigid with shock. "Captain," he said, his voice strange and hollow. "Something is happening to space itself about 10,000 kilometers from our position." Thrin forced herself to stand and move to the sensor station. And what she saw there made her blood run cold with a fear that went beyond anything she had ever experienced. Space was tearing open like fabric, being ripped by invisible hands. And through the tear came light that was golden and beautiful and absolutely terrifying in its intensity. "What is that?" Vess whispered before anyone could answer. A ship emerged from the tear. And the word ship felt completely inadequate to describe what they were seeing. It was a fortress of black metal and golden energy, stretching for nearly 5 kilometers from end to end, covered with weapon systems that the Valkyrie sensors could not even identify or classify. The hull was decorated with symbols and words in a language that Thrin recognized from the beacon console. And the largest symbol was a bird with spread wings, clutching arrows and branches in its claws. Below the bird were words that the translation program rendered as UNSC, Eternal Vigil, and a phrase that simply said, "We remember, humans." Korath breathed the word like a prayer or a curse. The sensor station began screaming new alerts as more tiers opened in space around them. And ship after ship emerged from the golden light until the darkness was filled with vessels that ranged from small fighters to massive carriers. Thrin counted 50 ships before she gave up, because new ones kept appearing faster than she could track them. And she realized that she was witnessing military power on a scale that the modern galaxy had completely forgotten was possible. Her communication console activated without any input from her crew, and a face appeared on screen that was unlike anything Thrin had seen before. The human woman had dark skin and silver hair, cut short in a military style, and her eyes were brown and warm and ancient, in ways that Thrin could not quite understand. "I am Fleet Admiral Myra Okonkwo of the United Nations Space Command 7th Reclamation Fleet," the woman said in perfect Valkyrie. "And I am responding to your emergency beacon." Thrin tried to speak, but found that her mouth would not cooperate with her brain. So she simply stared at the screen while her crew trembled behind her. "I can see that your vessel is badly damaged and losing power," Admiral Okonkwo continued. "So, I am sending engineering teams and medical personnel to assist with repairs and treat any wounded crew members." "Why?" Thrin finally managed to ask. The Admiral smiled, and it was a gentle expression that seemed wrong on someone commanding such overwhelming military force. "Because you asked for help," she said simply. "And we promised that we would come." Within minutes, human shuttles had docked with the Quiet Seeker, and teams of engineers and doctors swarmed through the damaged ship with equipment that seemed almost magical in its effectiveness. Thrin watched in amazement as human engineers repaired systems that her own crew had declared completely destroyed. and she saw human doctors treating injuries with medical technology that was centuries ahead of anything the Concorde possessed. A human officer approached her with a warm blanket and a container of hot liquid that smelled like herbs and comfort. "Drink this," the officer said kindly. "It will help you recover from the cold exposure." Thrin accepted the drink with shaking hands and tried to understand how the monsters from her childhood nightmares could be treating her with such genuine compassion. "I do not understand," she admitted to the officer. "The stories say that humans are ruthless conquerors who destroy everything in their path." The officer nodded thoughtfully before responding. "We were warriors," she agreed. "And we were very good at war, but that does not mean war was all we ever wanted to be." Before Thrin could ask more questions, Korath shouted from the sensor station with new alarm in his voice. "Captain, I am detecting a large fleet approaching from Concorde space, and they are broadcasting Dominion military codes." Admiral Okonkwo appeared on screen again, and this time her gentle smile had been replaced by an expression of cold calculation. "How many ships?" she asked. 200 warships, Korath reported, all of them heavily armed and approaching at maximum speed. Thrin felt her heart sink as she realized what was happening. The Concorde was sending a fleet to destroy her ship and everyone aboard, probably to prevent the humans from learning that galactic civilization still existed. "Admiral," she said desperately, "I am so sorry. I did not mean to cause a war. I just wanted to save my crew." Okonkwo studied her for a long moment, and something shifted in the Admiral's ancient eyes. "You did nothing wrong," she said firmly. "You were dying, and you called for help, which is exactly what that beacon was designed for." She turned to give orders to her own crew, and her voice became hard as steel. "All ships prepare for combat operations," she commanded. "Defensive formation around the Valkyrie vessel. And someone find out why the Dominion thinks it is acceptable to fire on beings under human protection." Thrin watched the human fleet move into position around her tiny research ship, and she understood that she was about to witness something that the galaxy had not seen in 2,000 years. The humans were going to war, and the Dominion had no idea what was coming for them. Fleet Commander Zethrak stood on the bridge of the Dominion flagship Crushing Might and smiled with satisfaction as his 200 warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of Sector 77. Null had been given simple orders: destroy the Valkyrie research vessel and leave no survivors who could speak of what they had seen or done. Scan for the target, he commanded, and prepare all weapons for immediate firing. His tactical officer worked the controls for several seconds, then looked up with confusion written across her face. "Commander, I am detecting the Valkyrie ship, but there is something else here as well." "What do you mean by something else?" Zethrak demanded before she could answer. The main view screen activated to show the space around their target, and every officer on the bridge felt their blood turn to ice. The tiny research vessel was surrounded by a fleet of ships that dwarfed anything the Dominion had ever built. And those ships were already moving into attack positions with smooth precision that spoke of thousands of years of military experience. What are those things? Someone whispered. Zethrak knew exactly what they were, because he had studied the old records as part of his command training, and he felt real fear for the first time in his military career. "Humans," he said, and the word echoed through the bridge like a death sentence. His communication console activated, and a human woman appeared on screen with an expression that reminded him of a predator studying its prey. "This is Fleet Admiral Myra Okonkwo of the UNS C-7th Reclamation Fleet," she announced calmly, "and you are approaching beings who are under human protection." Zethrak tried to find courage he did not feel and responded with as much authority as he could manage. "This space belongs to the Galactic Concorde," he declared, and you have no right to interfere with our operations." The Admiral tilted her head slightly, and amusement flickered across her face. The Valkyrie vessel activated a human emergency beacon, she explained patiently, "which means they are under our protection by treaties that predate your Concord by several centuries. Those treaties are no longer valid," Zethrak argued, "because humanity abandoned the galaxy 2,000 years ago." "We did not abandon anything," Okonkwo corrected him. "We simply stepped back for a while, and now someone has reminded us why we should never have left." She leaned forward slightly, and her eyes became hard as diamond. "You have one chance to withdraw peacefully," she offered. "Take your ships and leave. Report to your government that humanity has returned, and perhaps we can avoid unnecessary bloodshed." Zethrak thought about the orders he had been given and the consequences of returning to Dominion space without completing his mission, and he made a decision that would haunt the survivors of his fleet for the rest of their lives. "All ships open fire." He commanded the Dominion fleet unleashed everything. They had energy weapons and missiles and torpedoes and particle beams, all concentrated on the human vessels in a display of firepower that should have vaporized anything in its path. They attacks splashed harmlessly against human shields that glowed with golden light, and the alien weapons did absolutely nothing except announce that the battle had officially begun. "My turn," Admiral Okonkwo said quietly. The human ships responded with weapons that the Dominion had no names for, and the effect was immediate and devastating beyond anything. Zethrak could have imagined the first salvo destroyed 40 ships instantly. Not damaged or disabled, but completely destroyed, reduced to expanding clouds of debris and energy in the time it took Zethrak to blink evasive maneuvers. He screamed, but his orders meant nothing against an enemy that seemed to know where his ships would move before they moved there. Human weapons carved through Dominion formations with surgical precision, destroying some ships and crippling others in a pattern that seemed almost random until Zethrak realized with horror that they were targeting command vessels and weapons platforms first. His tactical officer was shouting damage, reports that grew worse with every passing second, and he watched on his screens as ship after ship vanished from his fleet display. "They are toying with us," his first officer said with disbelief in her voice. "They could destroy us all instantly, but they are choosing to take their time." Zethrak understood that she was right, and the realization made him feel sick with a combination of terror and humiliation. The battle lasted 4 minutes total, and when it ended, the Dominion fleet had been reduced from 200 warships to 23 damaged survivors, and the human ships had not suffered a single casualty. "I am opening a channel to the Galactic Concord emergency frequencies," Admiral Okonkwo announced, her voice still calm, as if she had just completed a routine training exercise rather than the most one-sided battle in galactic history. The transmission went out across every frequency and range, reaching Concord headquarters and member worlds and ships throughout the galaxy. This vessel fired upon beings under human protection, the Admiral stated clearly. "By the Exodus Accords of the Third Millennium, we consider this an act of war against humanity." She paused to let her words sink in before continuing. "You have one standard galactic cycle to present yourselves at the following coordinates for negotiation, and failure to comply will be interpreted as hostile intent toward humanity and all those we have chosen to protect." Her eyes seemed to look through the camera directly at every leader and commander watching her transmission. "We have been sleeping for a very long time," she said, "and we are well rested and eager to see what has become of the galaxy we left behind. So please do not make us come looking for you." She ended the transmission, and silence fell across the bridge of the crushing might as Zethrak tried to process what had just happened. His fleet had been shattered in minutes by an enemy they could not touch, and now that enemy was issuing ultimatums to the entire Galactic Concord as if 200 warships had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience. "What do we do, Commander?" His first officer, Askedithrak, stared at the human fleet on his screen and thought about the stories he had heard as a child, the legends that warned of humanity's return, and he finally understood why his ancestors had been so afraid. "We go home," he said quietly, "and we tell them that the humans are back." The Galactic Concord assembled in full emergency session for the first time in 300 years, and the fear in the Great Council Chamber was so thick that Thryn could almost taste it. She stood in a special observation gallery reserved for witnesses, watching as representatives from over 100 species argued and shouted and accused each other of causing the disaster that was now unfolding across the galaxy. Ambassador Ketvorn had been stripped of his rank and placed in chains, and he stood before the council as they debated what punishment could possibly be severe enough for the crime of nearly starting an extinction-level war. "You sent a fleet to murder innocent scientists," High Councilor Mrenthi accused him, "and in doing so, you confirmed every terrible thing the humans ever believed about us." "I was trying to protect the Concord," Ketvorn shouted back. "I was trying to prevent exactly what is happening now." "What is happening now is that humanity has returned," Senator Vrek said grimly, "and they are waiting at the coordinates they specified, and we must decide whether to face them or hide and pray they do not come looking for us." Thryn listened to the debate and thought about everything she had witnessed in the past 2 days. The terror of the dying ship, the miracle of the human rescue, the horror of watching the Dominion fleet destroyed in minutes. She had expected the humans to be monsters, but instead she had found something far more complex and far more frightening. A species that was capable of tremendous destruction, but chose to show mercy whenever possible. Admiral Okonkwo had treated Thryn and her crew with genuine kindness, providing medical care and repairs, and even a formal apology for the inconvenience of the battle taking place around them. "We did not mean to frighten you," the Admiral had explained, "but some lessons can only be taught through demonstration, and the Dominion needed to understand that threatening beings under our protection has consequences." Now humanity was waiting for the Concord to respond, and the Council was terrified to make any decision that might provoke further military action. "Perhaps we should simply refuse to attend," suggested one delegate. "Perhaps if we ignore them long enough, they will grow bored and return to wherever they have been hiding." That strategy did not work 3,000 years ago, Mrenthi reminded him, and I doubt it will work now. The debate continued for hours until finally a message arrived that silenced every voice in the chamber. The humans were tired of waiting and were coming to the Concord headquarters. Whether they were invited or not, panic erupted across the council floor as delegates scrambled to evacuate or hide or prepare desperate defenses that everyone knew would be useless against the power they had witnessed. Thryn remained in her observation gallery and watched as human ships appeared in the sky above the Concord capital, their massive forms blocking out the stars and casting shadows across the gleaming towers of the city. But instead of weapons fire and destruction, something else emerged from the human vessels, shuttles carrying not soldiers but diplomats. And the diplomats were accompanied by people who did not look like warriors at all. Thryn saw artists carrying instruments and paintings, philosophers carrying books and scrolls, teachers leading groups of children who looked around at the alien city with wonder and curiosity rather than fear. Admiral Okonkwo herself landed in front of the council building and walked through the great doors with an escort of exactly 12 people, matching the number of crew aboard the Quiet Seeker. She strode into the council chamber and looked around at the assembled representatives of galactic civilization. And when she spoke, her voice was calm and measured. 2,000 years ago, she began, you asked humanity to leave the galaxy because you feared what we were becoming. And we agreed because we shared that fear. She paused to let her words translate across 100 different languages. We were changing, she admitted. The wars were making us harder and colder and more willing to do terrible things in the name of victory. And our leaders recognized that we were in danger of losing everything that made us human in the first place. So we left. She continued. We found places beyond this galaxy where we could rest and heal and remember who we wanted to be. And we built a civilization based on art and knowledge and compassion, instead of conquest and domination. But we made you a promise before we left, she said. And her eyes found Thrin in the observation gallery. We told you that if anyone ever needed help badly enough to ask for it, we would return. She gestured toward Thrin with respect that the Velkari scientist had not expected. This woman was dying. Okonkwo explained. Her ship was destroyed and her crew was freezing, and she had no hope of rescue from anyone in this galaxy. So she activated a beacon that she barely understood and asked strangers from ancient history to save her. That is exactly what the beacon was designed for, she declared firmly. And we will never apologize for answering it. The council chamber remained silent as the admiral continued speaking. We are not here to conquer you, or rule you, or punish you for the sins of your ancestors, she said. We are here because we believe that the galaxy can be better than it was when we left. And we want to help make that happen. But we will not allow anyone to threaten or harm beings who come to us for protection, she warned. That is the one line we will not allow anyone to cross. And the Dominion fleet learned that lesson in ways that I hope will not need to be repeated. She looked directly at Keth Voren, who stood in chains before the council. You made a mistake, she told him. A terrible mistake born from fear and desperation. But we do not believe in destroying people for their mistakes when they can learn to do better. Humanity has returned, Admiral Okonkwo announced to the council and to the galaxy beyond. Not as the monsters you remember, but as the species we always wanted to become. We hope you will give us a chance to prove that we have earned our second chance, she concluded. And we look forward to building a better future together. 3 months later, Thrin sat in her repaired ship and wrote the final entry in her research log about the most important discovery of her career. I activated an emergency beacon expecting rescue or death, she wrote. And instead I witnessed the return of a legend. The humans came back not as conquerors, but as teachers. Not as destroyers, but as builders. And the galaxy will never be the same. Perhaps that is exactly what we needed all along.